Hello, my name is Chuck Cardwell, and I lost my stepdaughter, Debbie's daughter, on Amber Chambers on May 13th, 2008. She was 29 years old. She left behind two children who are now 6 and 14 years old. It is difficult as a survivor to understand the complexities of a death from suicide. The grief strikes every portion of our mind, soul, and body. We feel weak, queasy, dazed, numb, and a deep, deep sadness that we are not sure we can ever shake. We wonder if our life will ever be any better than the pile of nothingness that we feel, and we wake up every day to try to deal with those feelings over and over again. Just after the funeral, our moral and spiritual values are in question. We start experiencing an unsettling silence from our friends, co-workers, church members, neighbors, and even our own family members. We have tons of questions with no answers and no one to talk to. We begin to feel so utterly alone and isolated. We are left feeling angry, hurt, and confused. Our grief becomes debilitating. Many of us consider taking our own life, and many of us do. The stigmas surrounding suicide and mental health issues keep the survivors from beginning the healing process. Feeling isolated and being treated poorly by those that we once depended on for love and support keeps us in a state of confusion. We think of the tragedy over and over again. The mental image of the suicide itself is everywhere in books, movies, dreams, faces, songs. Everything is a reminder, and you can't make it stop. We try to remember everything about their life, all the details. We do not want to forget anything. We look for pictures and mementos because suddenly we realize that there will never be anything new. When did I see her last? When did I talk to her last? When was the last time I told her I love you? When was the last time I heard the words, Mom? The questions go on and on. We are always thinking about our loved ones. We cannot turn it off. We learn to carry it in silence so as not to disturb others with our tragedy. We are reluctant to accept invitations to do anything outside of the house because we find it exhausting to pretend to enjoy ourselves. We want to talk about the suicide. It's like a puzzle with a million pieces that you work on every day. We're always trying to piece it all together. We have to try and make sense of it all. For me, I've learned many things about mental illness, death, grief, and suicide since that tragic day. Because of the silence that started just after the funeral, I did my own research. The library and the internet became my best friends. None of what I discovered made me feel any better, but I did it anyway because I had no choice. I was alone. At the time, my husband, Chuck, worked out of town 18 days a month, and I was literally alone in my safe place as it had become. I tried to find support groups in our area with no luck, and eventually found a wonderful therapist that helped me to understand more clearly all those things that I had been researching. One thing I knew early on, there was no support for the survivors of a suicide loss in our area. I met other survivors at an Out of the Darkness community walk here in Huntington, just a few months after my daughter's death, and I knew then I needed to become involved. We spent a year setting up information tables at health fairs, fundraising events. We organized 2 suicide awareness walks and met many other survivors with similar stories. Clearly, There was a lack of information for the newly bereaved, no funding for the support of the survivors of the suicide loss, and a great need for support groups. Our vision became a reality when in December 2010 we launched Healing Hearts of Survivors of Suicide Loss support groups in Huntington and Charleston. Due to the success of the groups, on March 16, 2011, Messages for Hope Incorporated was officially created as a nonprofit organization in West Virginia. Our goals are to establish a network of peer-facilitated support groups throughout the state of West Virginia for the adults and youth. Create an after-suicide response team. This team would meet the newly bereaved for a personal visit that consists of trained peers from each of the established support groups, as well as any other mental health professionals that we may recruit to assist. The visit is necessary to help the newly bereaved understand the uniqueness of the death by suicide and to supply them with materials that can aid in their recovery process. We will also extend our visits to any organization or school that have experienced the death from suicide and may need group assistance. Due to a lack of readily available resource materials for the newly bereaved, we want to supply the funeral directors, mental health facilities, police, first responders, and state agencies with materials for the early support of a survivor of a suicide loss to aid with their grief and recovery process. We have started the lengthy application process for tax-exempt status under the IRS 501c3, and once we are approved, we will be able to apply for grants for funding Messages for Hope and to make available the resources necessary for the survivors of suicide loss and for suicide prevention through education. Recently, Debbie and I were added to the Board of Directors for the West Virginia Council for the Prevention of Suicide, where we can now have a platform to speak on behalf of the survivors of suicide loss. I, like many other survivors of a suicide loss, eventually learned to carry the grief with dignity, to not be ashamed, and you can see that laughter and joy can be restored even while you think of your missing loved one. Thank you to everyone for attending this evening. Messages for Hope appreciates the opportunity to tell you about our organization.